Fort Lauderdale is one of the fastest growing cities in America, and for good reason. Every year, thousands of people are choosing to move down here, drawn by the lifestyle, the tax advantages, the booming economy, and everything South Florida has to offer. But here's what's fascinating. Despite rising home prices, higher insurance costs, and increasing demand, people keep coming. So what's the real reason? It goes far beyond sunshine and beaches. This is a story about migration, wealth, tax policy, business growth, and a century of smart marketing that has transformed Fort Lauderdale into one of the country's most desirable places to live. And in this video, we're going to break down exactly why so many people are moving here and why the trend shows no signs of slowing down. So let's get started. So, is everyone actually moving to Fort Lauderdale? Let's do a quick reality check first, because the hype around Florida has gotten ahead of the actual numbers. Fort Lauderdale itself is a city of about 190,000 people, growing at a modest, just under 1% a year. That's not explosive growth. That's steady, boring, healthy growth. It's the county seat of Broward County, sitting between Miami to the south and Palm Beach to the north. Zoom out though, and the picture gets bigger. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm corridor is basically one continuous stretch of development running almost 100 miles up the coast. And by measures like the U-Haul Growth Index, Fort Lauderdale ranks among the top 25 destination cities in the country in 2025. Florida as a whole came in second nationally for inbound moves, only behind Texas. Here's the honest truth. The huge wave from 2020 through 2022 has slowed down significantly. Florida's population growth is now the slowest it's been all decade. A little over 500 new residents a day statewide, down significantly from the pandemic years. A lot of that slowdown comes from fewer people moving in from other countries, not fewer people moving from other states. And within Florida, most of the moves you hear about aren't people arriving from New York or California. They're actually people relocating from one Florida city to another. Only about 17.6% of the moves involving Florida residents are people leaving the state entirely. Even inside South Florida, Fort Lauderdale is off a stopover rather than a final destination. Buyers land here first, then push out to other areas like Delray, Boca, Pompano Beach, or West Palm Beach as they look for more space for the same money. But there's more to that than meets the eye. What this means for you as a buyer is that Fort Lauderdale isn't in a gold rush anymore. It's a steady, in-demand market, which is honestly a healthier thing to buy into than a bubble. You're less likely to overpay chasing the frenzy, but you should still expect real competition on well-priced listings, especially anything on the waterfront. So if it's not a stampede, what's still pulling people in? A huge piece of that isn't tourists or retirees at all. It's actually Wall Street. Here's how a New York trading desk ends up 40 feet from a Fort Lauderdale marina. Before we dive in, if this is your first time on the channel and you want to know everything about living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the surrounding cities, then subscribe below so you can be the first to know about our current market in Fort Lauderdale. My name is Hector Valdez. I was born and raised and have lived in South Florida my entire life. My team and I love helping people make their move to Fort Lauderdale, whether it's 9 days or 9 months. Feel free to reach out. Our contact information is in the description below, and we'd be happy to help you make a smooth move to Fort Lauderdale. So, why are finance people still moving here? You've probably heard people call South Florida Wall Street South. But what does that actually mean, and why should you care if you don't work in finance? About 15 years ago, Palm Beach County started attracting hedge funds and investment firms from places like New York. Then COVID changed everything. Companies realized that their employees didn't have to be in Manhattan to do their jobs anymore. So many moved to South Florida instead. Today, hundreds of hedge funds and financial firms have offices between Miami and Palm Beach, including big names like Goldman Sachs, Citadel, Point72, and Millennium. Together, they manage hundreds of billions of dollars and employ well over 100,000 people across the region. Fort Lauderdale has benefited from this growth too. These companies don't need factories or warehouses, they just need office space, fast internet, and talented employees who want to live nearby. Fort Lauderdale offers a lower cost of living than Palm Beach and Miami while still being close to both. So why does this matter for real estate? Because these firms bring high-income buyers who are purchasing homes, condos, and investment properties. This isn't just a short-term trend anymore. It's becoming part of South Florida's economy. That's one of the reasons home prices in areas like downtown Fort Lauderdale, Las Olas, and waterfront neighborhoods have stayed strong, even while many housing markets across the country have slowed down. But trading desks are only half of the story of why people actually pull the trigger and move. The other half is the part nobody puts in a spreadsheet, and that's a more powerful reason. All right, so here are the 3 things that actually sell this city. Strip away the spreadsheets and the recruiting billboards, and the pitch for Fort Lauderdale is very, very simple. No state income tax. Florida has never had one, and for anyone earning a high salary, that alone can outweigh a lot of other considerations. And it's the first thing that most buyers mention. The next thing is water, and a lot of it. Fort Lauderdale calls itself the yachting capital of the world, and it is beyond just marketing. The city has more canals than any comparable US city, which means waterfront living and boat access are realistic here in a way they simply aren't in most East Coast cities and California cities. Next up, climate. Warm winters are still the single most cited reason most people give for choosing Florida generally, ahead of taxes, ahead of job opportunities. And on top of that, remote and hybrid work never fully went away after the pandemic. A portfolio manager or an executive doesn't need to be in the same building as their company's New York office 5 days a week anymore. That shift alone did more to make Fort Lauderdale realistic for a lot of buyers than any tax rate. It removed the geographic excuse and left only the tax and lifestyle argument standing, which is very appealing. And at the very top of the market, most buyers are treating an 8-figure purchase here less like a home and more like a bet. A bet that this region continues growing as a financial hub. In 2025 alone, foreign buyers purchased $4.4 billion in South Florida residential real estate, up from $3.1 billion the year before. At that level, brokers increasingly describe purchases as portfolio decisions, not lifestyle decisions. Every one of those advantages, the tax break, the water, the job market, technically exists in Miami too, and Miami is more famous for all of it. Why do so many people who could easily afford Miami choose to live 30 minutes north instead? Let's put the 2 cities side by side. Fort Lauderdale versus Miami. Which should you buy in? This is a question I get asked the most. So let's just compare them directly. Miami wins on status, energy, nightlife, international brand recognition, and the Cuban food scene nobody else in Florida can touch. If your job or your social life is genuinely centered in Brickell, South Beach, downtown, Miami is the right call, and it's worth paying a premium to be close to it. Fort Lauderdale, on the other hand, wins on cost. Fort Lauderdale runs about 10 to 20% cheaper than Miami on rent and everyday expenses. A single professional needs roughly about $85,000 to $90,000 to live comfortably here, versus $100,000 or up to $140,000 in Miami. For families, it's $120,000 to $140,000 here versus $150,000 to $200,000 in Miami for a comparable lifestyle. That's not a huge gap on paper, but stacked over a decade of mortgage payments, property taxes, it's real money. Then there's traffic. Miami is more congested and simply harder to move around in day to day. Fort Lauderdale isn't traffic free, but it has shorter distances, a more predictable commute, and genuinely a very walkable downtown corridor along Las Olas Boulevard, without the Miami density or noise. If you're commuting to work or shuttling kids to school, that difference shows up every single day, not just on moving day. Waterfront access at normal price points. Fort Lauderdale has over 165 miles of canals. Actually, believe it or not, more than Venice. Miami wins on beaches and bay views, but Fort Lauderdale gives ordinary upper-class buyers a legitimate shot at canal front living, not just people buying oceanfront in Miami. None of this means that Miami's a wrong choice, but if your job and industry genuinely occurs in Brickell or South Beach, paying the Miami premium to be close to it can be a smarter call. But for remote workers, hybrid employees, finance professionals who need to be in the office 3 to 4 days a week, and families who want coastal living without the urban core price tag, Fort Lauderdale increasingly wins. Miami feels like a major international city, and Fort Lauderdale feels like a really nice big beach town. If you're moving for lifestyle rather than status, the beach town usually wins. And that's true for most buyers I work with. So if Fort Lauderdale really is the better and safer bet, what's the catch? Because there is one, and it's bigger than most buyers are prepared for when they actually first start touring homes. The part that nobody puts on a flyer: insurance and flood risk. Here's a part every buyer needs to actually understand before they sign anything. Fort Lauderdale has the highest expected annual flood damage of any US city, around $570 million a year, ahead of Miami Beach, ahead of St. Pete, and ahead of Tampa. Forecasters point out that that kind of storm that hits the Northeast like once a century can hit Florida about every 10 to 20 years. There's a materially higher baseline risk, and insurers have priced it accordingly. And here's where you'll feel the pinch. Property insurance premiums across South Florida have climbed sharply in recent years, and for waterfront property specifically, the increases have been steep enough to change where buyers actually choose to purchase within South Florida. Not whether they buy here at all, but exactly which street, which flood zone, which elevation. This is exactly why I always tell buyers, get a real insurance quote on a specific property before you fall in love with it. A gorgeous canal front home can come with a monthly insurance bill that changes your entire budget. Two houses 3 blocks apart can have very different premiums depending on the flood zone designation, the elevation certificate, roof age, and impact windows and doors. This isn't a reason to avoid Fort Lauderdale, it's a reason to buy smart. Know the flood zone, get an insurance quote before you're under contract, and build that number into your monthly budget from day one, not after closing. So if you're seriously weighing a move here, here's a few practical steps before you start touring homes. Number 1, get a flood zone check before you fall in love with the home. Every property here has a FEMA flood zone designation. Zone X is lower risk and lower cost. AE and VE zones sit at a higher risk area and carry higher premiums. You'll definitely want to ask for this before you actually tour a home, not after you actually place an offer. Number 2, get an insurance quote on the specific address, not just the neighborhood. Two houses in the same block can have very different premiums based on roof age, elevation, and the windstorm mitigation features like impact windows. Number 3, decide honestly whether you're a Miami buyer or a Fort Lauderdale buyer. If your job or social life pulls you south, don't fight that just to save money. Factor in the commute costs and the inconvenience. If you want space, water access, and a calmer daily pace, Fort Lauderdale is usually the better final decision. Number 4, budget property taxes and insurance together, not separately. In this market, insurance has become a significant monthly line item as the mortgage itself on many waterfront properties, and just speaking in general. None of this is complicated. It just requires doing it in the right order before you're emotionally attached to a specific home. So here's the real answer. Fort Lauderdale isn't winning because of sunshine, it's winning because it offers most of what most people want in South Florida. No state income tax, a strong finance-driven job market, water and boats, and a real lifestyle upgrade from the Northeast and California at a lower cost and lower stress level than Miami. The catch is real too. Higher flood risk and higher insurance, but a market that rewards buyers who do their homework. If this is your first time on the channel and you want to know everything about living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida and the surrounding cities, then subscribe below so you can be the first to know about our current market in Fort Lauderdale. My name is Hector Valdez. I'm born and raised and have lived in South Florida my entire life. My team and I love helping people make their move to Fort Lauderdale, whether it's 9 days or 9 months. Feel free to reach out. Our contact information is in the description, and we'd be happy to help you make a smooth move to Fort Lauderdale. See you in the next video.